What if the way that we've been talked to about raising our self-esteem, if we've had issues with confidence and self-worth and self-esteem and comparing ourselves to other people, what if the way that we've been going about resolving that is completely wrong? I watched a video last week. It's on YouTube. You can find it. I highly recommend you watch it for no other reason than it's fascinating, but especially as profound if you've ever struggled with self-esteem, self-worth, comparing yourself, imposter syndrome, fraudulence complex, or anything that really would reflect you having a level of self-worth that isn't optimal. It's called the Still Face Experiment. And it was an experiment that was done a few years ago where a scientific experiment, a mother and a baby are facing on. The baby is probably less than a year old, maybe a year old. And the mum is giving lots of validation, lots of approval, lots of praise, kind of like, yay, kind of happy faces, acknowledging when the baby points to something, the mum looks, that's amazing, gives it all this kind of amazing validation and approval. And then what they do is they get the mum to literally turn around and turn back. And when she turns back, she literally puts on a stone face or a still face. And what's amazing is what happens next. You've got to watch this video. What happens next is the mum holds this still face where she literally doesn't move. And the baby initially kind of is just like, yay. Very quickly, within a few seconds, the baby's demeanor changes. And you've got to see this experiment. I'd love to embed it into the video. But the baby all of a sudden starts to frown. The baby starts to like throw herself back. She starts to whimper. She starts to cry. She starts to play up. She reaches for mum, like, like in this kind of way. And it's really, really fascinating. And then within a few seconds, literally there's 30 seconds of what seems like a torturous ordeal for this baby. The mum restores to her normal state and all is right again. And so the reason why I share this video with you is this has really been fascinating to me, because I've been an avid kind of personal development person for as long as I can remember, right back in, my mid-20s, first kind of getting into, probably my first personal development was Brian Tracy. Then got into Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn, and then found Tony Robbins and the likes of Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and many others that have followed, Brendan Burchard, etc. But one of the things that's always been under the surface for me has been this kind of inferiority complex. This feeling of never really feeling enough. And truth be told, probably for as long as I can remember, I've had a lot of shame and guilt around that. So I've seen people do things and achieve things, and instead of feeling happy for them, I felt bad about myself. And then worse than that, I felt bad about the fact that I couldn't feel joy for a person. Like, so I've seen I remember a few years ago seeing a person have some success, a good friend of mine in television. And on one hand, I felt happy for him, but on the other, I felt empty. And then I would feel guilt about the emptiness. Like, why can't I just feel love for him? Why? And I felt ashamed and almost disgusted of the feeling that I wasn't fully embracing. And I'd see other people who seemed to be genuinely happy for this person or these persons that were doing amazing things in the world. But inside of me was a feeling of, why not me? And it just, every time I saw anybody do anything that I hadn't done, It just further reinforced this feeling that I am not enough. And this never, ever, ever shifted. It didn't matter how much personal development did, how many seminars I went to, nothing shifted this. Nothing really made any sort of change until I started studying inner child work, and specifically looking into the wounds that come up from childhood. And in most cases, if you have any sort of issue like the ones I mentioned at the beginning of the video, low self-esteem, low self-worth, comparing yourself, feeling not 100% happy and joyful when you see somebody achieve something, then it's likely that there is some form of inner child wound that is still open, that needs healing. And really this concept of inner child work, which is something that probably a few years ago I kind of dabbled with, but I never really went into. But it's really the process of going back, looking at childhood and starting to really nurture the child that still lives inside of you and actually giving it love. Whether that's in the form of meditation, whether that's in the form of journaling, whether that's in the form of visualization. First thing that has to be done is there has to be an acknowledgement of that wound. So for me, probably one of the hardest things was admitting to myself that I didn't feel great about seeing other people achieve great things. And the reason I didn't feel great about seeing other people achieve great things is ultimately because, going back to the still face experiment, the way I was raised, I didn't have the emotional grounding that a child would have really ideally wanted. Mum didn't have that capacity, that capability, ultimately because she didn't have it herself. Dad wasn't present. Mum left when she was very young. She didn't have that for herself. And so that has, for me, brought up a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger, and a lot of suppressed emotions, which ultimately stem back to an inner child that initially didn't have the external validation and praise that every child needs at that early infant stage. But then since then haven't spent the time until probably the past year, focusing on nurturing and validating that child that's within me. And so what I've been finding as I've been spending more time, you could say, validating myself, is, interestingly, as I now see people achieve things, there is still an initial unconscious response because this isn't fully healed yet. Like, this is not me professing that this is fully healed yet. Like, I'm doing these videos kind of raw and vulnerable and not making bold claims that I'm out of this yet. I'm not. I'm still in it, but I'm aware of it. And I think 90% of making any long-lasting change, 90% is awareness. It's having the wherewithal to admit to yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, you'll never be honest with anybody else, that this has been an issue. But then by admitting that it's an issue, it's really important that you're kind to yourself and acknowledge that this may be an issue that needs resolving, but it isn't something to have guilt and shame around. Like Brené Brown, there's some great stuff on guilt and shame, and there's nothing wrong with guilt. You know, if you do something bad to somebody else and you know it was bad, then having guilt, like, that's a good emotion. Remorse is a good emotion. Shame is not a good emotion. Feeling ashamed is not a good feeling. Guilt is good because guilt can lead to awareness and a change of behavior. Shame is more of I believe, an internal reinforcing of a inner child not being enough. of you being broken somehow, when nobody's fundamentally broken. Everybody that has ever struggled with what I'm speaking about today has merely had some form of internal challenge, which probably stems back to some percentage of a still face experience in their childhood. Which then leads to, as it's led to me, which is, I've had a long-standing pattern of seeking a huge amount of external validation and praise from other people. The positives out of that have been the work that I do, with life coaching, these videos. I'm fully aware that there is still a percentage of me that is doing these videos for external validation and praise. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of the irony of it. But I kind of think, well, as Tony Robbins says, we have 6 human needs, and one of the needs is contribution. And if significance comes as a byproduct of doing something good, that's good. If significance comes as a byproduct of just doing something that's bad, right? But if we're doing something, if we're putting things out in the world that actually are helpful, that may add value and make someone's life better, then that's a good thing. Even if there is an undertone to that, which is that person, like me in this instance, can admit that there is a percentage of it that enjoys the, hey Miles, great video. Hey Miles, really enjoyed what you said in that video today. Hey Miles, that was really helpful. Like I'm transparent and vulnerable enough to admit that that's a part of it. I can admit that. Because I no longer have shame around it, like there's something wrong with me. Like I used to try and change myself on such a logical level. Like I need to be like that person, rather than accepting that this is part of who I am and using it as a force for good. Like I used to be ashamed of my inability to express my emotions well. I used to be ashamed of the fact that I was quite feminine in nature, rather than using it as a force for good to maybe perhaps help other men that have also had an issue and struggled with their masculine and feminine energy. So rather than now complaining about it, I go, maybe this is a gift that God gave me. Maybe this is what I'm meant to do in the world, which is to help people that have been through this, but maybe haven't had the exposure to the kind of personal development resources that I have. And maybe this is my gift. So highly recommend you check out the still face experiment video. It's a really, really good, fascinating thing to watch. It's really important that if you're feeling any of the things that I've spoke about in this video, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You've got to know that. And lastly, I really recommend that you start looking into, at a minimum, some inner child work. Inner child meditations, there's a lot of them on YouTube. Some of them are as simple as, like there's a really nice one I like on YouTube where it literally has me going to the flat where I live when I was little. And the little version of me is playing football, and I go and play football with him for the whole of this meditation. And then I kind of high five him and I get in the car and I drive home. And we have a hug and we have a kiss and an embrace, and I just spend some time with him. It's beautiful. It's really powerful. There's a great book by Lucia Capaccione called The Recovery of the Inner Child. Really recommend that. That's a fascinating book. Definitely something I'll study again. Very good book where you write with one hand as your inner child. So you use your non-dominant hand to write as your inner child, because it's probably a 3-year-old's handwriting. And then you write with your other hand as if you are your adult self. That's really powerful. But know that all the personal development in the world, nothing will ever make you feel worthy or more than. And by more than, I don't mean compared to anybody else. But nothing will ever validate you like you validating yourself. And actually having a over reliance on other people validating you is only going to make it worse, because it literally is like putting a band-aid over a serious wound that needs real medical attention. So this type of work I'm speaking about is a lot deeper, and especially if you're watching this and you're a coach. I had an interview this week, and I regularly say, I think I heard Rich Litvin say this once, you can only take your client as deep as you've been yourself. So it's kind of like scuba divers can only take their clients as deep as the PADI, the license that they've got. It's the same with coaching. If you're a coach, you can only take your clients as deep as you've been yourself. So, I recommend this if you are a coach, you explore this work, because then the deeper that you go on yourself, the deeper you can take the client. And the deeper you take the client, the more likely you are to help them to truly transform, not just for the short term, but for the long term. Hope you enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed speaking this stuff out. I always do. Comment, let me know your thoughts, what you got from this. If you've got something that you maybe want to share with me privately, because you don't want to post it as a comment, feel free to put it in the comment. Feel free to send me a direct message wherever you're watching this. Make sure you hit subscribe if the option is there to do that. And other than that, have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Take care.